I was very fortunate. I've always considered it an integral part of who I am to have grown up in New York City, which was just such a cultural mecca to be in. The availability of so many great influences from the art museums to Broadway theater, which I started discovering when I was very young. My first real professional go to a theater, sit down and hear music that someone bought me a ticket for was Harry Belafonte when I was, I think, about 9 years old. 1960. So it would have been when I was nine. And it was an absolute revelation to be in a theater with a great performer performing great music. And that kind of captivated me in a big way. And, I was also the typical kid who was into a lot of sports, the local baseball teams, and to a lesser extent basketball. And I participated and I watched. But I think when the Beatles hit, that lure was really strong, and it started kind of transforming me away from the kid who wanted to play center field for the New York Yankees, which I was never going to do anyway, because I was never that good, to the kid who wanted to, be in a band. The Beatles made playing rock and roll seem like so much fun. And I do consider seeing them at Shea Stadium a real turning point, because my brother obtained a pair of tickets to the Beatles at Shea the second time they played there, the final time, August 23rd, 1966. And I still had a week left in summer camp. And I said to my parents, I ain't missing this. Is it okay if I leave summer camp a week early and come back to New York and see the Beatles at Shea? And they said, fine. And so that literally was like, it transformed me. I didn't go back to that summer camp the next year, as you might imagine. I was at a little artsy and craftsy summer camp up in Western Massachusetts, because I had been quite, as the Beatles became more hippie-ish, so did we all. That actually goes back to my earlier musical influences, which one part I didn't touch on was my first engagement in activism was through the civil rights movement. And one very transformative event in my life was going to a benefit that was headlined by Pete Seeger for the Congress of Racial Equality. And it was a memorial for the 3 civil rights workers who had been murdered in Mississippi while trying to register voters. And that event just was huge in helping to form my consciousness, and also in helping to make me appreciate the power of music as a vehicle of social change. Probably, I would say the effect, since I was 13 when that concert happened, it probably wasn't foremost in my mind. I knew that concert had a profound effect on me, and it probably pushed me more into activism than it did into music at that point. I started going to civil rights events, and then a few years later, there was the peace movement. There was Vietnam and all that, and I became very active and very embroiled and sometimes endangered in that, because I breathed a little tear gas and I, dodged some policemen's clubs and things like that. That's a whole other part of my life that also tied into music, because I'd be going to the Phil Oakes concerts and, and fairly political musical events. Was running around with the Yippies a little bit with Abby and Jerry and those guys. So that was another thread of my musical life there. I was influenced by a lot of music pre-Grateful Dead that I think prepared me for the Grateful Dead. Jazz was an early gateway to me. And I was also into a lot of jug band music and folk and acoustic music. The one that had the most profound influence on me was the great jazz pianist Billy Taylor, was also a great jazz educator and a broadcaster. He hosted a show every day. And I'd listen to it regularly, but sometimes I actually get to go up to the studio and hang out. And, circa 1968, I guess. And so that's where, my grounding in Miles and Coltrane and Ornette Coleman and all that stuff started happening. And that was all just very shortly before I stumbled onto the Grateful Dead. And here's this band that's playing pretty much every kind of music I love all at once, sometimes in the course of the same song. So when I heard this band that was incredibly eclectic and drawing from all these sources and playing some very weird music, because I'd also been turned on at a very early age to a bunch of 20th century avant-garde music when I was in my teens. So what the Grateful Dead were playing seemed not too weird to me, but just the kind of weird I liked. So yeah, that's what led me up to the moment, May 5th, 1968, to be exact, when I quite literally stumbled upon the Grateful Dead because I thought I was going to a free concert by Jefferson Airplane. My brother had been at Fillmore East seeing Jefferson Airplane the night before, and they announced they were going to play in Central Park the next day. And my brother called me and said, "Hey, Jefferson Airplane, Central Park." I had not yet seen the Airplane. I loved them. So I said, "Sign me up." I was only expecting Jefferson Airplane, and I actually caught the last few tunes of Butterfield, which was great. And then there was a break, and then they set up for Jefferson Airplane, and I loved the Airplane. And then they finished, and I'm getting up to leave, and Marty Ballin says, "Stick around, the Grateful Dead are coming up next." And I said, I guess I'll do that. I guess I can spare another hour or two. So they came out and they played. And of course, I was unfamiliar with most of the material because they only had one album out, and they played a lot of stuff that I later recognized wound up being on Anthem of the Sun. But I had no frame of reference at that time. And I remember they opened with Morning Dew, I'm pretty sure. And they closed with an insane Turn On Your Love Light, which of course they had not yet recorded, but I think I probably was familiar with the Bobby Blue Bland recording. And then they went into some insane feedback, and they closed with We Bid You Good Night. So I wouldn't say that I got on the bus right away, but I think the Grateful Dead was my favorite thing that day. And I said, for file away for further research, basically. And then I didn't get to see them again. I think they only played New York once more in '68. And then I saw them again in early 1969, but in an unusual role for them. They were opening for Janis Joplin. Quite frankly, in my estimation, she got blown off the stage by the Grateful Dead, who only had an hour to play. They if you look at the recordings of those shows, it's like 59 minutes. They were so concise. I mean, so unlike what you'd expect from the Grateful Dead, they fit their little universe into this compact package. I was a little more familiar with them, and I really dug them at these shows. And so I said, well, I'll definitely check them out the next time they come. And it was the next time. The third time was absolutely the charm. I went to Fillmore East, June 21st, 1969, the second of two nights. I didn't catch the first one. Went to the early show, was so blown away that I went right out to the lobby and bought a ticket for the second show, which there still were some because the Dead weren't that big yet. And those two shows were kind of the foundation of my, obsession, my saying, I can never, miss a show by this band again. Whenever it's possible for me to see them, I will. And I did a whole lot that summer into that fall. And then 1970 was maybe my deepest year of immersion in the music. My most concentrated indulgence in the Grateful Dead. I saw they played 2 nights at Fillmore East of 2 shows each. And then there was 1 night off, and then 3 nights of 2 shows each at the Cafe A Go-Go, which is a tiny club. The place was just sardine time. But so I saw 10 shows, over 5 nights with 1 night off in the middle. So that was my heaviest dose, as you might say. And then, in 70, it was constant. I mean, first of all, in 70, New York Deadheads were just the luckiest people on earth because they played like 45 shows in the same year. And I caught, I think, about 34 or 35 of them myself. So, it was insanely fortunate to be a Deadhead in New York in 1970. I was a Northeast guy until 1974. And then I moved to the Bay Area where, of course, the Dead were also abundantly available. So I was never really wanting for them. So I never toured very much, by the way. I was not, I was getting more than enough Grateful Dead in my diet. They were always so available to me that I didn't really have a feeling of deprivation. Because I also wanted, I wanted to keep my love for the Grateful Dead music in proportion with the rest of my artistic and cultural affinities and proclivities. So I always wanted to go out and hear a lot of jazz, and I always wanted to go. I'm also a major like classic and foreign cinema fan, so I'd be going to movies, and I'd be going to there, and then I'd be reading books, and I'd be hooked on some television series or something like, all kinds of. I'm sort of a pop culture and and music omnivore, so I didn't want my dead thing to become my sole identity. I know I'm publicly identified and always will be, and very grateful to be as for my relationship with the dead. But I also, for my own cultural nourishment, I've got to go to a lot of different places. 74 was a really cool time to move out there. It was actually, I got there just as the Dead were beginning the hiatus, the final shows at Winterland. I caught 4 out of those 5. And then I was around for those pop-up shows they played in 1975. I got to go to each of those. And then when they resumed business, there they were again. So yeah, from 1974 until early 2004. 30 years, which as a incurable New Yorker, I always called a very nice visit. I mean, I got to the Bay Area with one, one part of my mind saying, well, I'd like to pursue a career as a musician. I also knew how hard that was. And I jumped from band to band that never really got off the ground. My fallback position was always, well, if I can't really make it actively as a musician, I'd like to work for either Bill Graham or for the Grateful Dead. And I was pursuing the Bill Graham thing, and getting, polite rejections for a number of years while I was in a variety of bands of little success, or varying levels of small success or no success, and working day jobs, record stores and such. And I was fortunate enough that a friend of mine became the director of advertising and promotion at BGP a couple of years before I finally got in. And she knew I was a writer, and they needed someone to write press releases for shows and other BGP initiatives. And she knew I was a decent writer. So that position came open simultaneously to Bill opening a new club called Wolfgang's. And I wound up getting hired for both jobs at once. July of 1983. It all happened at once. So, I was again lucky, and I kind of passed the test. I got to do the work, and I did it to an acceptable enough level that I got to stick around there for 8 years. Hands down, the greatest club I've ever. It would have been the greatest club I ever attended as a customer. It was an incredible privilege at which to work, because it was a perfect size. It was perfectly suited for a sit-down acoustic jazz or folk show. It was perfectly suited to the Beastie Boys, who did a pretty legendary show there, or blues, or R&B, or, they had a regular heavy metal Monday series, which was not exactly my thing, but it was, it was pretty successful. Bands like Metallica played there before anyone knew who they were. And it had an extremely eclectic booking policy, and that level of service and that level of attention to detail and care for the customer that Bill instilled in all his venues Wolfgang's was, I think, the most perfect expression of that. It had a great staff and crew, great technical people. It sounded incredible. It had a great Meyer sound system. And it was just a dream to work at. And unfortunately, it suffered damage in a fire. It didn't burn down, but there was like smoke and water damage. And Bill's company decided not to go back in and try to fix it, which I think was a great loss, from which I don't think the Bay Area has totally recovered in some ways. I don't think they've had a club of that size and that quality since. They've had some good clubs, but Wolfgang's was just far and away the best. The way he ran, his venues. I mean, Fillmore East came along at a very fraught time in terms of the counterculture, saying, "Oh, music should be free." And Bill Graham was kind of like a target of disapproval because he was a unabashed capitalist, and I was probably straddling that line. I probably was one of those naive hippies who thought, oh, if everything was free, it would just be great. Look, here are the Grateful Dead playing free in the park. Why can't everybody do that all the time? Because people need to make a living. That's why. And Bill was more concerned with people making a living and paying a decent wage and giving the audience value for their dollar. I mean, as absurd as it may seem, it was like a big point of contention in the East Village when the price at Fillmore East went from $5 to $5.50. That was considered the height of greed. And, the really lucky thing I got to do at Wolfgang's was I became part of a little unit of people who promoted a very specific kind of show, which is shows that fell between the cracks of easy categorization. We promoted all the reggae, African, jazz, blues, R&B, world music, occasional things like rockabilly, like all the stuff that wasn't mainstream rock and roll. I was on this little team and we promoted that, not just at Wolfgang's, but on the larger company. We would promote things like Reggae Sunsplash at the Greek Theater and occasional larger shows at the Warfield. So that really spoke to my deepest musical interests. And, it was the stuff that the mainstream rock people at BGP didn't want to be bothered with. They were so rock centric in their tastes and in their notion of what should be promoted. So we were kind of the little outliers and the little outlaws within the company. And we were very successful. The shows we promoted invariably or almost invariably did really well. And they found an audience. So that was, we actually got to put on the show that got Baba Olatunji and Mickey Hart together for the first time. So that was a great thrill. A really great part of my life in music was working in that group that was promoting those underrepresented kinds of music, I guess I'd say. The pinnacle of my experience at BGP was that Bill kind of called me in to be one of the right-hand people when Nelson Mandela, who had just been released from prison in South Africa, did a tour of America in support of the African National Congress and to, kind of drive the final nails in the coffin of apartheid. It was like a fundraising tour, and he did large events in several cities. And I think the peak one was in Oakland, the Oakland Stadium, which we filled with 55,000 people. And since Bill wanted the musical focus of this thing to reflect the gifts of Africa to America, so we had everything from traditional African music to jazz to blues and R&B. And it opened with Baba Olatunji leading a 250-person drum procession through the stadium to the stage. And that was like one of Bill's last masterpieces. This was in 1990. He died in 1991. And he considered it a real peak in his life that he got to pull that thing off. And I worked very closely with him through that. So that was an amazing experience to be right there with Bill, helping to put that thing together. That was kind of the essence of what Bill did, is he always paid that attention to detail. And it's a lesson I learned. I can't go to a concert as a customer anymore without looking around and seeing how well those jobs are being done. It's like if an aisle is blocked or something, I think like Bill, I say, why aren't they taking care of that? Because he just instilled that in a very permanent way in just about everybody who ever worked for him. One of the things I respected most about Bill and respected most about the Grateful Dead and a lot of the musicians that I respect the most was that melding of art and activism. Sometimes an argument comes up in the Grateful Dead world, don't bring politics into this, or they would say the Grateful Dead weren't into politics, which isn't true. They weren't into conventional politics like vote for this guy over that guy very often, but they were always activists. And the thrust of the Rex Foundation's work was always in the service of activism rather than just mere charity. So those events where activism and music came together were very much part of why I was in the music business. That using music as a tool for social change and for raising consciousness was always central to the Dead, always central to Bill. One of the great delights of doing the radio show is we hear from third or fourth generation Deadheads, or we hear from older folks who say, "Oh yeah, I've taken my kids to the shows, and now I'm taking my grandkids to the shows." That's extraordinarily touching and satisfying. Really, it's like the little kid's dream of running away to join the circus fully realized, and the fact that it's kept going, and the fact that the individual guys have kept it going, and the audience has kept it going to a tremendous extent. If they didn't show up, there wouldn't be much impetus for the guys to keep doing it. Although they would, I think. Oh, it feels great, and I could not feel more fortunate. I that I've gotten to do this as a job is just almost preposterous to me. But